Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Hello everyone, my name is Michael Carter, and I'm 38 years old. I always thought that finding the love of your life would make everything great, but how wrong I was. But let's start from the beginning. Since childhood, I wasn't an outstanding child. I only knew one thing. If you want to achieve something, don't wait for help, work for it. My mother raised me alone. My father left when I was 5, leaving only a few old photographs and a surname that meant nothing. We lived in poverty. There wasn't enough money even for proper clothes, but my mother struggled as best as she could. She worked as a waitress, carrying heavy trays at a roadside diner, and in the evenings, she would collapse from exhaustion. I realized early on, if I didn't start working, would simply end up on the streets. At 14, I washed cars. At 16, I carried cement bags on construction sites. By 18, I could lay bricks and make concrete slabs. It wasn't just work, it was survival. Nothing was ever given to me for free. No money, no respect, no chance. Everything I have, I earned myself. I've come a long way from a boy hauling bricks to someone respected in the construction business. I wasn't a boss, didn't sit in an office in an expensive suit, but I knew my trade, and that was enough. At 20, I was a general laborer. At 22, I learned to read blueprints. By 25, I was a foreman, and by 30, I managed entire projects. I wasn't an engineer. I didn't have a fancy education, but I knew how to lay a foundation correctly, how to lead people, how to build so that the building would last for decades. The work was tough. In the summer, we burned under the sun. In the winter, we chopped ice off the rebar, and in the autumn, we sank in the mud. I broke my fingers, tore my back, got hit by concrete slabs, and tripped over scaffolding. But I didn't care. This was my life. I never believed in fate. I didn't think life could be planned like the blueprint of a house. Sometimes something happens that just changes you forever. That's how it was with Emily. I met her when I was 24. I had just started making my way up in the construction business, working as a foreman on one of the city projects. We were building a residential complex, and every morning I saw a slim girl with red hair tied in a messy ponytail coming out of the nearby cafe. She always had a large paper cup of coffee with her, nibbled on a croissant, and was always in a hurry. Her smile was light but a little distracted, as if she was thinking about something else. I didn't know who she was, but I looked forward to seeing her every morning. One day, I went into that cafe myself, just to have some coffee, I told myself. Although, in reality, I wanted to be closer to her. She was standing in front of me in line, looking for something in her bag when she suddenly dropped her phone. "Damn," she muttered, bending down. I managed to pick it up before her and handed it to her. "You've got good reflexes," she smiled, taking the gadget. "I work in a job that requires them." I smirked. She glanced at me. Work boots covered in cement, hands scratched, tan skin. "A builder?" "Right. So, if I need to build a house, I know who to ask." I didn't know what to say, but she smiled, and something inside me flipped. "Michael," I introduced myself. "Emily," she replied. She took her coffee and left, but I knew this wasn't the end. After that, we started meeting more often. Sometimes I would purposely go to the cafe, even if I didn't need coffee. Sometimes she would slow her pace so we could exchange a couple of words. It turned out she had just moved to the city and was searching for herself. She worked as an assistant in an office, but dreamed of a family and a home. "I'm not a careerist," she would say, twirling a spoon in her fingers. "I just want a normal life. Comfort, family. To wait for my husband to come home from work, cook dinner, and make the house cozy." It sounded so right that I fell in love with her completely. We started dating. We went for evening walks, sat in cafes, and talked about everything. I took her to the construction site and showed her how real builders worked, and she laughed at how I spoke about concrete as if it were something sacred. A year later, I proposed to her. No drama, no diamond ring, just sitting on a bench in the park, holding her hand. "Let's get married?" She smiled. "Let's." We got married modestly. No luxurious banquet, no crowds of guests. Just us, a couple of friends, and the old tavern where we had our first kiss. I was sure that our marriage would be as solid as the houses I designed and built. Everything was just as I always wanted. I worked from morning till night, came home tired but happy because I knew Emily was waiting for me. She really made the home cozy. The house always smelled of delicious food, chicken stew, fresh baking, or coffee in the mornings. She loved to cook, and I ate whatever she put on the table, even if it was too spicy or had a strange taste. "Michael, how do you like my new recipe?" she asked, her eyes shining. I chewed something that resembled overcooked dough with some mysterious filling inside. Original," I said, trying not to cough. She laughed, slapped me on the shoulder, and said, "If you keep complaining, you'll have no dinner." But the next day, she was back in the kitchen, and I joked that one day we'd open a restaurant called Unexpected Flavor. Emily was passionate. Outwardly, she seemed like a modest housewife, but in bed, sometimes, she would jump on me right on the kitchen table, among the breakfast dishes. "What are you doing?" I would ask as she wrapped her legs around me, running her fingers through my hair. "Just checking how tired you were after work," she would purr. We loved each other. She would sneak up behind me while I was brushing my teeth and press her whole body against me, whispering something playful in my ear. Or when I was watching TV, she would lie on my chest and lazily draw circles on my stomach with her finger. Even when I came home late, exhausted, she always found a way to make me smile. One day, she decided to surprise me with a home renovation while I was at work. "I painted the bedroom," she proudly announced. I went in and froze. The walls were, let's say, patchy. Some areas were too dark, some strokes were crooked. "Did you paint with a brush or with your hands?" I asked, holding back my laughter. "Don't be smart." I tried my best. I couldn't hold back any longer and burst out laughing. In response, she grabbed the paint-covered roller and ran it across my t-shirt. "Oh, really?" A minute later, we were rolling on the floor, covered in paint, laughing like children. Another time, I tried baking her a pie for her birthday. Everything was going well until the dough decided to explode in the oven. "Run, it's alive!" Emily screamed when I tried to save the situation but was almost blinded by the steam. We laughed so much that in the end, we just ordered a cake. I was never paranoid. I always trusted Emily, never checked her phone, never made scenes. But when something breaks, you feel it. At first, I didn't pay attention. Well, she ordered food a couple of times, it happens. Then a couple more times. And then I realized she had almost stopped cooking. "Did you order food again?" I asked one evening, noticing another takeout box on the table. Emily shrugged. "Yeah, I had a tough day." "Tough? You've been at home all day." She irritably set down her fork. "Yeah, Michael, but you don't understand what it's like to handle the household every day. I just wanted a little rest." "Is that forbidden?" I didn't say anything, but inside, the alarm bell started ringing. I installed the camera by the front door a year ago, not to spy on my wife, but for safety. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, but who knows what could happen. Now I used it not for security. Now I was watching who was coming into our house. I started noticing that the same delivery guy appeared more and more often. A tall, fit guy around 25 with a light stubble, wearing a branded delivery jacket. On the footage, I could see him handing Emily her order, and they were smiling at each other. I rewound the footage, then again. Smiles. Quick glances. Head tilts when they exchanged words. Once, he said something, and she quietly laughed, covering her mouth with her hand. I felt something twist inside. I started reviewing the footage from the past 2 weeks. This delivery guy was coming more often. Every other day. Then every day. Sometimes twice an evening. But the worst part wasn't this. Sometimes he stayed at the door longer than necessary. Sometimes Emily would step outside to take the order, and they would talk about something. One day, as I was fast-forwarding the video, my finger froze on the screen. On one of the clips, late in the evening, he handed her a package of food, then quickly ran his fingers across her wrist. She didn't pull her hand away. My fists clenched so tight that my knuckles turned white. I turned off the phone and closed my eyes. Something is happening, and I need to find out exactly what. One day, I noticed that Trey came even when there were no orders. I watched the footage. He appeared at the door, rang the doorbell, and Emily let him inside. I fast-forwarded. 5 minutes. 10. 20. He didn't leave. I felt a cold chill run through me. I reviewed all the footage from the past week. He had come at least 3 times without any orders. The time between his arrival and departure ranged from 10 minutes to half an hour. I could no longer ignore it. I tried to talk to Emily again. "Did Trey come by today?" She didn't even flinch. "Who?" I clenched my jaw. "The delivery guy." She shrugged. "I don't remember." "Maybe." "Yeah." I looked her straight in the eyes. "I see everything. We have cameras, Emily." For a split second, panic flashed in her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. "Yeah, he came. He forgot something last time." "What exactly?" She shrugged. I have no idea. He just said he wanted to check something, and I let him in. She's lying. I didn't ask any more questions. I just nodded and walked out. But now I knew what I had to do. I waited for the next delivery. This time, when Trey handed her the package, I was already sitting in my car nearby. As soon as he left, I started the engine and carefully followed him. Trey didn't know he was being followed. He drove confidently, without looking back, and soon turned toward a residential area. I parked far away and watched. He left his motorcycle by a small house and went inside. Now I knew where he lived. I wasn't going to act blindly. Just beating this idiot. No, that wasn't enough. I needed to know who I was dealing with. I started with the simplest thing, social media. Trey Barnes, 26 years old. Former street racer, several speeding tickets, one arrest for a fight in a club. Nothing too serious, but it felt like he wasn't the kind of guy who followed the rules. I dug deeper. Strange photos, expensive cars, shots with people I wouldn't consider law-abiding citizens. And then, a photo taken just a couple of months ago. He's in a bar with some guy, and in the comments, someone wrote, "Another job done, now it's time to relax." I took a screenshot. Then, I dived into forums where people discussed illegal dealings in the city. That's where I found Trey's name. He worked for people involved in setups and scams. Trey Barnes wasn't just a food delivery guy. He was delivering packages, things that were better off not in the hands of the police. After all the details I'd learned about Trey's life, I decided to give myself some time to process it all and figure out how to proceed, and decided to live my normal life. On one of those ordinary days, I got home earlier than planned. The workday was shorter. There were problems with the supply of building materials, so we got sent home early. Usually, I would call Emily before coming home, but this time, I decided to surprise her. I climbed the stairs, put the key in the lock, and was about to turn the handle when I noticed someone else's jacket on the coat rack. Immediately, everything inside me froze. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and walked in. Voices, muffled, but clear, someone else was inside. I took a step into the living room and saw Trey Barnes. He was standing in front of the sofa, arms crossed over his chest, looking as if he felt at home there. Emily was sitting in front of him, curled up, her face tense. As soon as she saw me, her eyes widened with fear. "Michael," she whispered. Trey didn't even flinch. He slowly turned his head, met my gaze, and smiled. "Oh, you're early," he said lazily, as though I were a guest in my own home. I stood there, fists clenched. My chest was burning. "What the hell are you doing in MY house?" Trey tilted his head, his smile widening. "We're just having a chat. Your wife invited me." Emily flinched as if he had hit her with his words. "That's not true," she gasped. She stopped. I took a step forward. "Let's put it another way," I growled, staring the stupid in the eyes. "Why do you keep coming here without orders? Why do you come when I'm not home?" Trey grinned. "Relax, buddy. Your wife and I, we have a trusting relationship." I felt something inside me explode. I lunged forward. Trey dodged, taking a step to the side. "Calm down, Mike. You're a builder, not a fighter." I grabbed him by the collar. "I'll break you, idiot." At that moment, Emily screamed, "Michael, stop." Her voice, it wasn't just fear. There was desperation in it. I turned sharply toward her, then explained to me, "What the hell is going on?" Emily clenched her hands, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She was on the verge of tears. I'll tell you, just don't hurt him." Trey smirked and placed his hand on her shoulder. My fists clenched painfully, but I understood one thing. She was really hiding something. I watched as Trey placed his hand on my wife's shoulder, and at that moment, something inside me snapped. I lost it. With a sharp move, I grabbed him by the scruff of his neck, and without giving him time to react, I slammed my fist straight into his jaw. A dull thud. Trey flew backward, crashing into the wall. "Damn," he grunted, shaking his head. "Get out of my house, idiot," I hissed through clenched teeth. Trey wiped the blood from his lip and smiled. "Well, here we go. You're so predictable, Michael." He stood up, stretched, as if I had just brushed past him in a bar, not just punched him in the face. I didn't give him a moment to catch his breath. The second punch into his stomach. Trey doubled over, but still smirked. "You think you're the first one to try to throw me out? I think you're the first one I'll throw out the door." I grabbed him by the jacket, spun him around, and shoved him toward the exit. Trey stumbled, but he was still on his feet. Hey, he said, raising his hands. "Don't get worked up. buddy. I'm just here to chat." I grabbed him again and yanked him out through the door. "If I see you here again," Trey clapped his hands. "You gonna kill me, huh? Just like in the movies." I slammed the door in his face. For a few seconds, I stood there, fist clenched, until I heard his fading footsteps. Only then did I turn to Emily. She was standing there, her face hidden in her hands. "What the hell is going on here?" My voice was low and threatening. She sniffled. "Michael, the truth. Now." I saw her hands shaking. She took a deep breath and finally looked me in the eye. He's blackmailing me." I froze. "With what?" Emily lowered her gaze. "Money, and something I did." I frowned. "What did you do?" She clenched her hands. I got involved in his dirty work, and I understood that this was only the beginning." I stood there, frozen, not understanding what had just happened. A few minutes later, I replied to Emily, "Explain what you mean." Emily was sitting on the edge of the sofa, her fingers intertwined so tightly that her knuckles were white. She couldn't look me in the eyes. "Speak." My voice was firm, no trace of patience. She squirmed, wrapped her arms around herself. "I made a big mistake, Michael." I silently waited. "One day, I was in the cafe. You remember when the oven broke and I went to have breakfast at Riverside?" I nodded. "Then I met Trey. He just started talking to me. He was polite, funny, and it was nice." Something inside me boiled. "And?" Emily fidgeted, hugging herself. I don't know, like I was young again. You were always working, I was alone. The days blurred into one. And he just gave me some attention. I gritted my teeth. "You slept with him?" "No," she blurted out, looking up sharply. "Michael, I swear." I stared at her, trying to read the lie in her eyes. But there was only desperation. "Then explain, what the hell is he doing in our house?" She took a deep breath. "He offered me an easy way to earn money. Just pass on packages." Her voice cracked. I frowned. "What packages?" Emily closed her eyes. "I didn't know, at first. He said it was just documents for his acquaintances. One day he left an envelope at our house, asked me to pass it to someone. I did. Then again, and again, I felt everything inside me go cold." "You didn't even ask what was in them?" She shook her head, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. Later I guessed. "Michael, I realized it wasn't just documents." I stood there, motionless. "What was it?" Emily sobbed. "Money. Fake documents. I don't know what else. But I realized I was in deep when he said that if I wanted to leave, I'd have problems." I closed my eyes. She got caught up in a criminal scheme. I ran a hand over my face, trying to process what I had just heard. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was scared, Michael." Her voice trembled. "If you found out, you'd try to deal with it. And he threatened me. He said that if I told anyone, if I stopped doing what he said, he'd make sure that not only I suffered." She looked at me, and in her eyes, I understood. He had threatened me. "He said he knows where you work, that he knows your routes, that he has people who can make sure you have an accident." I clenched my fists so hard that my nails dug into my skin. "You gave him money?" Emily nodded. "Yes. He said that now I had to pay for my mistake." I took a deep breath. Everything fell into place. Trey didn't just seduce her. He used her. After everything I had learned and seen, I couldn't just stand there listening anymore. My whole body was boiling, every cell demanding one thing: to deal with this stupid right now. Trey had just walked out of my house, but he couldn't have gone far. I grabbed my jacket, checked if the knife I always kept for emergencies was still in my pocket, and rushed to my truck. "Michael, stop!" Emily screamed, but I didn't hear her anymore. I started the engine, slammed the gas pedal, and sped onto the street. "Where are you, idiot?" I knew what he was riding, a black Kawasaki with red stripes. He always parked it near our house. I quickly scanned the street. There, Trey was riding casually, as if nothing had happened, smoothly steering the bike, adjusting his jacket with one hand. I gripped the wheel, then jerked it to the right and picked up speed. My headlights lit up his silhouette. He noticed me. I saw his shoulders tense, saw him instinctively speed up. "No, man, not this time." I floored the gas pedal, closing the distance. My pickup had the advantage of weight, and if I wanted to, I could have just plowed him off the road. But I didn't want it to end that quickly. Trey swerved right, turning onto a quieter street. I knew what he was trying to do: disappear, lead me into an area with fewer cameras. But I knew these streets better than he did. I turned after him. Now only a few meters separated us. He tried to shake me, but my pickup was too close. I waited for the right moment and swerved sharply in front of him. His tires skidded. Trey lost control, veered to the side, and crashed down with a loud crack. I stopped the truck, stepped out, and slowly walked toward him. He groaned, trying to get up, but his right leg was trapped under the bike. I stood over him, looking down. "Now you're the one on the ground, scum." He lifted his head, his lips split, a gash on his forehead. But damn it, he was still smiling. "You're pissed as hell, Mike," he croaked. I kicked him in the chest, pinning him to the ground. "You have no idea." Trey coughed, but he still smirked. "You think it's that simple? Think breaking my face will change anything?" I leaned down. "I think you made the biggest mistake of your life." I grabbed him by the collar, yanked him up from the ground, and slammed him against the wall of a nearby building. "You used my wife. You threatened me. You played with my family." I clenched my fist. "And now it's time to pay." The first punch landed in his stomach. Trey coughed, doubling over, but I didn't give him a chance to recover. The second punch straight to the jaw. He collapsed onto the ground, spitting blood. I leaned down again, grabbed his collar, and hissed, "Who are you working for?" He smirked, spat blood, and whispered, "You have no idea who you're messing with, Mike." I tightened my grip around his throat. "I'll ask again." Trey gave a weak chuckle. "Even if I tell you, you won't change a damn thing." I squeezed harder. "Who are you working for?" He wheezed. "People who won't like what you're doing." I felt an even greater rage ignite inside me. But before I could say anything else, I heard the sound of an approaching engine from behind. I turned sharply. A black car with no plates emerged from around the corner. "So, someone really is backing you up." I dropped Trey and bolted for my pickup. This isn't over. But now I knew one thing. I would get to the truth, even if I had to break everyone who stood in my way. I knew they wouldn't let this slide. When I saw that black car with no plates, the first thought that hit me, they wanted to get rid of a witness. And that witness was me. I jumped into my truck and hit the gas. The rearview mirror showed them following me. All right then. Let's play. I drove fast but steady, but my heart was hammering in my chest like a jackhammer. Up ahead, a crossroads. Red light. I wasn't stopping. I yanked the wheel, shot through the intersection, barely dodging a taxi, and heard screeching tires behind me. But they weren't giving up. The black car was still on my tail. I turned into the industrial district. Narrow streets, abandoned warehouses, dim streetlights. The perfect place if you wanted someone to be found in the morning with a bullet in their head. But I knew what I was doing. I weaved between the deserted buildings until I spotted the perfect place for an ambush. I slammed the brakes, killed the engine, and got out. The black car pulled up moments later. Doors opened. 3 guys. "Well, look at that, he didn't run," said one of them, tall, shaved head. "That makes things easier." I stood calmly, hands in my pockets. "What do you want?" The second guy, stocky, tattoo on his neck, smirked. "Trey said you two had a misunderstanding. We're here to clear it up." "Clear it up," I scoffed. "Or just beat the shit out of me." "You asked too many questions," grunted the third, a tall, skinny one. They started moving toward me. I didn't wait. The first punch into the stocky guy's nose. He staggered, but didn't go down. Shaved head swung at me, but I dodged and drove my fist into his ribs. The skinny one lunged at me from behind. I shoved him hard into the wall. The fight turned into a brawl. I managed to turn, but the stocky guy already landed a punch to my jaw. A sharp pain shot through me. I tasted metal in my mouth. "So we're doing this the hard way." I took a step back, pretending to stagger. And when the bald guy lunged at me again, I suddenly stepped forward and drove my elbow into his throat. He choked, clutching at his neck. The stocky one rushed toward me, but I ducked under his punch and slammed my knee into his stomach. The skinny one, recovering, pulled out a knife. "You have no idea who you messed with, stupid," he hissed. I breathed heavily, staring at him. "No, it's you who doesn't understand." When he lunged, I grabbed his wrist, twisted it sharply, and struck his elbow with my fist. Crack. He screamed. The knife clattered to the ground. I picked it up and slowly approached the bald guy, who was still gasping for breath. "Who sent you?" I asked coldly. "Go to hell," he muttered. I grabbed him by the collar, shoved him against the wall, and pressed the knife to his cheek. "I'm asking again." The stocky one raised his hands. "Dude, we're just delivering a message." "What message?" He swallowed. "Trey said if you don't back off, things will get really bad for you and your wife." I pressed the knife a little harder. "So Trey didn't get the message when I broke his jaw?" The stocky one remained silent. I shoved the bald guy aside and turned to the others. Tell your friend that if he comes near my life again, I took a step closer. I will come for him. And next time, he won't get back up. They stared at me in silence. I tossed the knife aside, turned around, and walked to my truck. I knew this wasn't over until I ended it myself. Trey and his people thought they could toy with me, threaten my family, use my wife. They were wrong. I didn't need the police or the courts. I was the court. I wasn't going to wait for Trey to show up again. I found him first. I knew where he lived. I knew where he hid. I spent hours sitting in my car, watching him. And when he left his apartment that evening, I followed him. Trey was heading toward the old docks, a place where people rarely went. Perfect place for a conversation. I quickened my pace, caught up with him, and shoved him hard in the back. He stumbled, turned around, and saw me. Shit, he hissed. I didn't give him time. I punched him in the stomach. Trey doubled over, coughing, but still smirked through the pain. You still don't get it, he croaked. I'm not just a courier. I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. I don't give a damn who you are. He tried to twist away, but I smashed my fist into his jaw. Loud, sharp. Your game is over, Trey. You think this will stop me? He spat blood. I grabbed him by the throat, squeezing my fingers. If you show up near my house again, if you ever try to touch my wife again, I pressed him harder against the wall. I will break you completely. He was silent, just breathing heavily, realizing that this time he had lost. I let go of him, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Disappear, I said. Get out of my life. Forever. Trey didn't answer. He just lay there, trying to pull himself together. But I knew he understood. This was his last mistake. I came home late that night. Emily was still sitting in the living room, hugging her knees. When I walked in, she looked at me hopeful, fearful. Is it over? She whispered. I nodded. He won't be back. She closed her eyes, sobbed, stood up, and threw her arms around me. I'm so sorry, her voice trembled. Michael, I gently pulled her hands away. We need time. She froze. I wasn't going to leave her. But trust. Trust doesn't come back in one night. She nodded, understanding. I love you, she whispered. I didn't respond. I just looked her in the eyes. Now it was up to her. I knew that just saying we need time wasn't enough. After everything that had happened, I couldn't just forgive and forget. Yes, I had protected my family. Yes, I had gotten rid of Trey. But what now? Trust doesn't return overnight. That's why I agreed to Emily's suggestion, couples therapy. I had never been the type to talk about my problems with strangers. When we sat down in the chairs, across from us was Dr. Lawrence, a strict woman in her 50s with a warm but piercing gaze. Michael, Emily, she began gently, looking at us. I understand that you've been through a difficult time, but the fact that you're here means you want to fix things. I crossed my arms, feeling uncomfortable. Emily sat beside me, her fingers trembling. Dr. Lawrence looked at me. Michael, tell me how you feel. I clenched my jaw. I feel betrayed. Emily flinched. The doctor nodded. That's natural. When trust is broken, all that's left is pain. I smirked. I don't need theory. I need to know how to trust my wife again. Dr. Lawrence interlocked her fingers. Trust is rebuilt through actions. Small steps. Through honesty. She turned to Emily. Emily, how do you plan to regain Michael's trust? Emily looked at me, her eyes full of pain. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I looked at her. Really? Yes, her voice shook. I know I made a terrible mistake. I know I betrayed you, but I want to fix it. Dr. Lawrence listened carefully. Michael, are you willing to give her a chance? I was silent for a long time. Then I nodded. 1. Emily sobbed, but I saw determination in her eyes. She understood there wouldn't be a second chance. The therapist gave us assignments. First, complete honesty. Emily told me everything, where she was, what she was doing, even if it was just a trip to the store. Second, rebuilding our bond. It wasn't instant, but over time, thanks to therapy, our relationship slowly improved. And now, with pride, I can say, I am happy.